Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something that might shake you up. Why are so many people over 60 avoiding others? Is it because they're grumpy, tired of the world, just set in their ways? Wrong. Let me tell you the shocking truth, and I need your full attention, because this is not about age. This is about pain. This is about a slow, emotional death that nobody talks about. You want to know why people over 60 avoid others? It's because the world told them you're no longer relevant. And over time, they started to believe it. If that doesn't break your heart or wake you up, I don't know what will. But here's the thing. We're going to rip that lie wide open today. Because when we understand the real reason behind the silence, we can bring back connection, purpose, and power. So stay with me, because this isn't just their story. This is your future too. And how you treat it starting today will define the legacy you leave behind. They smile. They nod. They tell you they're doing just fine. But the truth behind that smile is often something most people never bother to look for. You see someone over 60 walking alone, sitting quietly at a family gathering, skipping the party, or declining invitations, and the first thought most people have is they just prefer to be by themselves. We label it as independence or introversion, when in reality, it's something far more heartbreaking. The hidden pain behind the smile is this. Many people over 60 avoid others not because they want solitude, but because they've been hurt deeply and repeatedly. And now, rather than risk more rejection, they retreat. It's not solitude, it's self-defense. Imagine going through decades of life where your worth was tied to your role as parent, worker, caretaker, community leader. For years, people looked to you, leaned on you, needed you. You mattered. But suddenly, after a certain age, those calls stop. The job ends. The kids grow up and get busy. People stop asking for your opinion. Technology changes so fast it makes you feel lost in your own world. And slowly, the conversations shift from "what do you think" to "don't worry about it." The very people you raised or worked beside no longer seem to see you the same way. You're not included in the decisions. You're no longer at the center of anyone's plans. You become a background character in your own life. And here's the most painful part. This doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in. One missed invitation, one forgotten birthday, one too many moments when you speak and no one listens, or worse, interrupts you mid-sentence. And that slow drip of invisibility, it turns into a flood of isolation. So instead of facing another dinner where you feel like an outsider, you stop going. Instead of reaching out and being met with half-listening ears, you stay silent. It's not because you want to be alone. It's because it hurts more to be surrounded by people who don't really see you than it does to be alone in your own space. And yet, society celebrates this as dignity. We say things like, they're strong, they keep to themselves. But the truth is, many are silently grieving the loss of identity, of relevance, of feeling like they still have a place. And we rarely talk about it because it's uncomfortable, because it forces us to confront our own future, our own fears of aging and becoming less needed. The pain isn't just emotional, it's physical. Studies have shown that emotional isolation triggers the same part of the brain as physical pain. Loneliness literally hurts. And for people over 60, that hurt is compounded by years of accumulated micro-rejections. Small things that don't seem like much in the moment, but build into a belief. Maybe I don't belong anymore. This is the reason behind the avoidance. It's not lack of interest in connection. It's fear that connection will come with judgment, pity, or irrelevance. It's a silent scream that says, I used to be someone. Do you even remember? We must stop mistaking emotional withdrawal for preference. The smile they wear might be real, but it's not the whole story. Beneath it lies a need we all share, the need to matter, to be heard, to be seen. And if we don't make the effort to uncover what's behind that smile, we'll keep losing some of the most powerful, wise, and beautiful voices our society has to offer. Because that smile isn't saying, I'm fine. It's saying, please, just notice that I'm still here. We've all heard it, I like being alone. It's a phrase that rolls off the tongue easily, especially from people over 60. On the surface, it sounds like peace, balance, maybe even wisdom. But when you look closer, when you really sit with it and listen, not just to the words, but to the pauses between them, you realize something deeper is going on. In so many cases, what's being called solitude is actually a form of emotional self-protection. It's not that they want to be alone. It's that being alone feels safer than risking the pain of being dismissed, ignored, or forgotten again. Imagine reaching a stage in life where your phone rings less, your opinions are sought less, your presence is taken for granted more. At first, you might try harder. Call more often. Say yes to every invite. Try to stay relevant in conversations that now revolve around apps you've never heard of or slang that feels like another language. But after a while, you start noticing something. When you speak, people talk over you. When you share a memory, it's brushed aside like ancient history. When you offer advice, it's met with polite nods and quick subject changes. Eventually, a powerful thought begins to creep in. Maybe they're just being nice. Maybe I'm not really needed anymore. So you stop showing up as much. Not because you don't want to, but because the effort begins to feel like rejection in slow motion. Every time you step into a room and feel invisible, it chips away at your sense of value. And instead of risking that over and over again, you build a quiet world for yourself. A world where you don't have to perform, where you don't have to feel like you're chasing relevance, where you can convince yourself that you choose to be alone, not because you don't want company, but because company has stopped feeling safe. This is where the phrase, I like being alone, becomes a shield. It becomes easier to say than I don't feel welcome anymore. Easier to explain than it hurts to feel forgotten. Easier to believe than I don't know where I belong now. Here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Loneliness often wears the mask of preference, and our culture rewards it. We applaud independence in aging as if emotional self-sufficiency is a badge of honor. But what we're really doing is rationalizing abandonment. We don't want to admit that the very people who taught us to speak, to love, to build families are now whispering into empty rooms because no one's listening anymore. This isn't just sad, it's dangerous. Because the longer someone pretends solitude is their choice, the deeper they sink into emotional isolation. And when that becomes their reality, coming back out of it feels impossible. They begin to believe the lie. No one wants to hear what I have to say. But here's the thing, this is reversible. Because deep down, no matter how many times someone says they prefer to be alone, the human heart still longs to connect. It longs to be asked, what do you think? Not because someone is being polite, but because someone truly cares. It longs to be seen not as a relic of the past, but as someone with wisdom, value, stories, and relevance right now. So the next time you hear someone say, I like being by myself, pause before you accept it at face value. Maybe they do, but maybe, just maybe, it's the only way they know how to say, I don't want to be hurt anymore. There's a kind of silence that's louder than any noise you'll ever hear. It's not the silence of a quiet room or an empty street. It's the silence of being ignored, of saying something and getting no response, of showing up and realizing no one really noticed. That's the silence many people over 60 are living in every day. And they're not avoiding people because they're antisocial or bitter. They're avoiding people because they're tired of being unheard, tired of being overlooked, tired of feeling like they're fading while the world races past without even glancing back. It starts small. You're in a room with younger people and you share a thought, something you've experienced, something real. But before you finish your sentence, someone interrupts. They talk louder, faster. The conversation moves on. No one even acknowledges what you said. At first, you tell yourself it's no big deal, but it keeps happening again and again. Soon you find yourself staying quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you've been taught by silence that your voice no longer holds weight. This is the most devastating form of rejection, not open disrespect, but quiet erasure. A subtle message that says, you had your time. Now sit back and fade into the background. And people hear that message, not in words, but in how others stop asking for their input, how they're excluded from decisions, how the world starts speaking a language they're no longer invited to understand. What's worse? Society doesn't just ignore them, it romanticizes it. We tell ourselves they're at peace, slowing down, enjoying retirement. But if you were to really ask what many older adults feel, it wouldn't be peace. It would be invisibility. There's no fire left in being treated like decoration at your own family's table. No pride in being reduced to small talk or a nod in the corner. They didn't stop engaging because they were done with people. They stopped because they realized people were done with them. And the impact of that, it's massive. The human spirit shrinks when it isn't seen. Confidence erodes when no one listens. Hope dims when no one asks you what you think anymore. This doesn't just affect their social lives, it affects their health, their mental strength, even their will to live. Because when you feel like you don't matter, when you feel forgotten, why would you keep showing up? But let me tell you this, no one is born irrelevant. Relevance isn't tied to youth. It's tied to connection. When someone listens to you, really listens, you feel alive again. When your opinion is valued, you feel respected. When your stories matter to someone else, you start to matter to yourself again. That's how powerful it is to be seen. So what's the cost of ignoring the older generation? We're not just losing voices, we're losing wisdom. We're losing the fire that built the very foundation we now stand on. And what's worse, we're teaching the next generation that aging means disappearing. That once you're past your so-called prime, your words don't carry weight. That is a lie. And it's one we all pay for. But there's still time. Time to turn toward, not away. To lean in when someone over 60 speaks. To ask questions, to listen deeply, not to be polite, but to truly connect. Because the moment you choose to really see them, you invite them back into the world. And you help shatter the silence they've been trapped in. Because the loudest silence isn't found in a quiet room. It's found in a life where no one's listening anymore. And we, each of us, have the power to break that silence simply by caring enough to hear. There's a story that plays out across countless households, communities, and conversations, and it often goes unnoticed. It's the story of the man or woman who once stood at the center of everything, raising kids, running businesses, managing homes, mentoring others, now sitting quietly at the edge of the room. People walk past them. Plans are made around them. Conversations happen over them. And still, they smile, they nod, they stay quiet. But if you listen closely, not to their words, but to what's missing, you'll hear the sound of disconnection growing louder every day. Over the years, people over 60 are conditioned to believe that their best contribution is to stay out of the way. They've been told to enjoy retirement, to slow down, to relax, as if their role in the world has officially ended. These messages don't always come directly. They show up in subtle ways, in being excluded from decisions that affect the family, in being talked to like a child by someone half their age, in being told you wouldn't understand before they've even been given a chance. This kind of conditioning builds over time, and like water dripping onto a stone, it eventually shapes beliefs that were never there before. They begin to think, maybe I really am outdated. Maybe they're better off without my input. Maybe it's just easier to keep my distance. That's not just disconnection, that's identity erosion. And it doesn't come from within. It's taught, repeated, reinforced. So they pull back. Not because they want to, not because they've stopped caring, but because they've started believing the world no longer cares about what they have to say. And here's the irony, the more they withdraw, the more society misinterprets that withdrawal as preference. They're just more private now, people say. They like their space. When in fact, many are screaming inside for connection, but no longer have the energy to reach out and be ignored one more time. We assume aging comes with some kind of emotional immunity, that people get tougher, more self-sufficient, less needy for connection. But that's just not true. People don't stop wanting to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. That need doesn't shrink with age, it grows. Especially when everything else begins to feel like it's slipping away. What most people don't realize is how often people over 60 are craving conversations that aren't just surface level. They want to talk about their lives, not just their prescriptions. They want to be asked about what they've learned, not just how they're feeling physically. They want to be invited into real connection, not pitied or patronized. But they've been conditioned to expect less, to stay small, to stay out of the way. And here's the heartbreaking part. They still have so much to give. Wisdom, perspective, humor, history, emotional depth. These things don't diminish with age. They deepen. But when no one asks, when no one listens, when no one includes them in meaningful dialogue, that richness gets locked away. And not because they're unwilling, but because they've been silently told they're no longer needed. That kind of disconnection is not just sad. It's a societal failure. We're cutting ourselves off from a vital source of depth, grounding, and wisdom. And if we don't challenge the false belief that aging equals irrelevance, we'll inherit a world where every generation feels more disposable than the last. So the next time someone over 60 says they're just keeping to themselves, take a closer look. Don't assume it's their choice. Maybe it's their shield. Maybe it's the only way they know how to cope with a world that taught them to fade into the background. And maybe with just one honest conversation, one moment of seeing them clearly, you can help reverse a message they've been told too many times. You don't matter anymore. Because they do. And deep down, they're just waiting for someone to remind them. They don't talk about it. Not really. But if you sit with them long enough, if you create the space for honesty to rise to the surface, you'll hear it. Underneath the smiles, behind the polite small talk, buried beneath stories about the past, there's a quiet ache, one that comes from watching the world they once knew disappear piece by piece. For people over 60, the world around them isn't just changing, it's changing without them. And that feeling, that subtle but powerful realization, it makes them pull away, not out of anger, but because they no longer recognize the rhythm of the life surrounding them. Imagine spending your life building relationships, businesses, traditions, and routines that made you feel grounded and useful. Then, seemingly overnight, the technology changes, the conversations shift, the values of society evolve, and suddenly you feel like a stranger in your own timeline. The songs are unfamiliar. The slang makes no sense. even the way people communicate has changed. You're left asking, when did everything start moving so fast, and why does it feel like no one's reaching back to bring me along? That disorientation is deeper than generational confusion. It's the psychological fracture of no longer feeling like you belong in the space you help shape. You start questioning your relevance. You notice how people your age are portrayed in media: frail, out of touch. Comedic relief. You go online and see a culture obsessed with youth, speed, novelty. And instead of asking how to catch up, many simply stop trying. Not because they don't want to learn, but because they're tired of feeling left behind every time they do. So what happens next? Disengagement, withdrawal. Not out of bitterness, but exhaustion. Because